Hello everybody, you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. And we catch up with Twangling Jack Ford over in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review. As always, you can reach out to me here at the studio by dropping me a line on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain @wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s to share local arts news, etc. Don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcast. We are going to head over to the Rhylight Zone for The Eyes Behind the Lighthouses. So this is some short non-fiction from my collection Scarlet Sins about some of my poetry. The Eyes Behind the Lighthouses. Not all of my poems have a story behind them, but many of them do. Some of them make more sense if you know the stories behind them, while with others it's just nice to have the added context. I memorise my poetry and perform it at open mic nights, which means I usually get an opportunity to introduce them. It's harder to do that with a poetry collection, and at the same time as a writer, I want to give my readers the freedom to draw their own conclusions from the work I share. So that's why I'm publishing this in Scarlet Sins instead of as part of the collections. If you want to read the poems that this talks about, then you'll need to pick up copies of Eyes Like Lighthouses When the Boats Come Home and Kiss Kiss Death Death, which you should totally do. In fact, if you email me on dane@danecobain.com and say that you're reading Scarlet Sins, I can send you e-copies for free or offer a 20% discount on signed copies of the physical books. The poems in my collections are grouped together into sets, and so I'll run through the books and the sets in chronological order. I'm not going to mention all of the poems, just the ones with a story behind them. Here goes. Eyes Like Lighthouses When the Boats Come Home. Anxious Words. This entire set of poetry came about when I started writing a daily poem on my lunch breaks at work to deal with anxiety disorder, which is where the name comes from. This also comes across in some of the poems. Stanley's Nervous Breakdown is written using tweets from a guy called Stan who applied for a job at my old workplace. Univocalisms takes its name from its form. Each of the stanzas uses just a single vowel, i.e. her sex needs respect uses only E. Donald Trump's huge new erection is named after a headline about a building that Donald Trump was planning, and it was written before it was announced that he'd run for president. And Arriva 800-850 was written during a 5-mile walk home from work after a bus didn't show up. Smoke and Mirrors. This set takes its name from the fact that I switched my poetry sessions up so that I wrote on my cigarette breaks instead of on my lunch break. Stallions takes its name from Wild Stallions, the titular character's band in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Who is named after The Who, and Chester is named after Chester Bennington of Linkin Park. The Illusion of Time takes its title from an old Super Nintendo game, although it's not actually about it. And Naviglio Grande is named after the canal in Milan where I wrote it. Pistols is about a concert that I went to by a band called Dub Pistols. Don't Panic. This title is a nod to both Douglas Adams and my anxiety disorder. Anonymous's White Mask of Freedom is an epic poem that advocates for an open, unregulated internet, while Get F***ed Up with the Hooligans is about the horror hooligans from Forsaken, an imprint of Book Trope, my first publisher. Bonds is the name of a pub in the town that I grew up in, and the poem itself was written the day after spending the night there. Mick Foley is about the professional wrestler who retweeted it, and GE Day was written on the day of a general election. The Sentiment Suite. This set of poems was created so I could ask people in the audience how their day was and then reply on the fly with the closest poem to their answer. That's why each poem has a descriptive one-word title like busy, boring, long, and awesome. At the Foot of the Altar of Knowledge. This is a relatively random collection of political poems and travel poetry from a visit to Amsterdam. Last Train Back to Brixton was written on the way to the airport, and Automatic Popo is about being woken up by armed anti-terror police. Blood Bike Day is about a charity campaign I worked on for a client in support of the National Association of Blood Bikes, an organisation which delivers blood, plasma, organs and other vital medical supplies in emergencies through a fleet of motorbikes and an army of volunteers. Broken Glass After Closing Time. These poems are mostly about a time in my life when I was helping out at the local arts centre, which is where the title comes from. Living the Dream was written about a visit to the Second City Signings event in Birmingham. The Words Melt on Your Tongue was written after someone challenged me to write a poem that included the word pistachio. Wolves and Foxes. I don't believe in spirit animals, but if I did, then my spirit animal would be a wolf. This collection is home to a few of my favourites from the whole book, including Dying, which is all about anxiety. There's Only Her Between Them and The Flights of Your Darts are two different poems that are designed to be formed back to back. And then there's Food Pills, which is a true story about something that my dad used to say. Falling Through Time. Variations on a sonnet is exactly what it sounds like, a spin on the popular form and a rare example of one of my poems which follows a form, albeit a bastardised form. Skeptics Don't Have Churches is based on a talk I heard at a local Skeptics in the Pub event. Being a terrorist sympathiser is in response to some remarks from David Cameron about people who oppose plans to bomb Syria. Kiss Kiss Death Death took its name from something that someone said at an open mic night, and it would go on to become the title of my second collection. Found. This set is based entirely on an album by Paul Armfield called Found, which itself is based on a collection of second-hand photographs that he collected from Berlin flea markets. Each of the songs on the album is based on a photograph, and each of the poems in Found is based on Armfield's lyrics. The poems also take the titles of Armfield's songs. Kiss Kiss Death Death, Drowning in Fire. The first poem in this set, No Pressure, is about the existential crisis a poet faces after they publish their first collection and need to start thinking about the next one. Ayahuasca is a hallucinatory drug that I've never had the pleasure of trying, and I wrote the poem after a documentary spree. His Brother's Beard is about Ant and Ali Lightfoot, who have magnificent beards. When I Rule the World is about a former colleague called Marie Anne Leonard, who had a list of people that she'd execute if she was supreme ruler of the world. Vantablack used to be the blackest black, but it had already been superseded by an even blacker black by the time that the poem was published. Echoes Reflections. Don't Flop is named after the YouTube channel that uploads performances from underground rappers, and the EDL is about the time that racists from the English Defence League flooded High Wycombe to protest the fact that we have a large Muslim population. I marched against them on the counter-protest and wrote the poem on my phone while I was there. Beacons was an entry into a poetry competition for Beacon Festival in Beaconsfield. It didn't win. Bad News for Philosophers. This is my favourite set in the book because it covers so much that's personal to me. Why I'm Like a Vampire is exactly what it sounds like, while Fear is an anxiety poem. Good God was initially written for a blogger who provided me with some of the words that I used in the poem, and that Days Eat Their Tails Like a Starving Snake and Monday are both about the inevitable passage of time. Find Your Roar was written at Sunday Assembly High Wycombe as part of my role as poet in residence, and Never Trust a Train Driver and Sketches are both old poems, circa 2010, that I resurrected because I thought they still had some potential. Struggling to Breathe on West End Street. The title of this set takes its name from the street that I lived on while I was writing it. From the Mouth of a Cat was written about an ex-girlfriend's mum's cat, Cookie, and not about my own cat, Biggie. That poem comes in the next set. The National Arboretum was written at the National Memorial Arboretum in Lichfield, not far from where I grew up. The rest are self-explanatory. Tenuous but culturally relevant. The title here was overheard in a group conversation on WhatsApp and felt like it could apply to my poetry. Reading in Reading was written when I made a guest appearance at Sunday Assembly Reading. Autosuggest was written by starting a sentence and then hitting the middle option on Autosuggest on my phone until it was finished. Many of the rest of the poems are about moving into a full-time freelance role, as it was written when I transitioned from full-time employment to becoming my own boss. Dining in Hell at the Devil's Right Hand. The Day After a Terror Attack was written the day after the Manchester Arena attack and was my way of making sense of it all. Flash was inspired by a collection of flash fiction that I was working on, and Vino Vanitas was written for a YouTube collaboration and is named after the poet that I worked with. Bang is a meta-poem, a poem about a poem that pokes fun at my own style of poetry. Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. Written during a period of high depression and anxiety in which I was using cognitive behavioural therapy to manage my symptoms, the poems in this section were written over the space of a year or so. To display help, press the question mark button is another live poem from an event where the projector wasn't working, and Falcon Heavy was inspired by Elon Musk and his attempts to commercialise spaceflight. Burning Bridges. This set got its name because I realised that I inadvertently burn bridges by losing touch with people. I suppose it's something that happens to everyone. That concept led to poems like Being the Best You Can Be and The Truth, as well as a few other bonuses like Delirium Tremens about the booze shakes and Always Zinc, which is one of those fairly stereotypical A to Z poems that you see all over the place. Not everything has to be innovative. Hiding from the Light. This title comes quite literally from what I spend my time doing. I'm mostly nocturnal and often spend the daytime sleeping. It includes my most recent poems, including a few on the theme of veganism and one called What a Privilege that I wrote after a long period with no new poems. Critics explains why that was, although it's an older poem. Sometimes I'll write things that later become even truer than they were when I first put pen to paper.
At the risk of being violently ill, I would take I'd always go to the castle on the hill. I'd sit down the way James told us to, but I'd never play Wonderwall, not even for you. I forgive Chris Isaac's wicked game, and I cross the desert on a horse with no name. I step on Elvis Presley's blues with each shoe, but I'd never play Wonderwall, not even for you. And the first rule of open mic, watch the other act whoever they are. The second rule of open mic, never stop to think you're a star. I will ask you to come over and bring Valerie, though I can tell by the shape of you that you should let it be. I might tell you it's all over, baby, but I never play Wonderwall, not even for you. I'm on fire, I'm free falling, so stand by me. I'm chasing cars, I'm a boxer, I'm a space odyssey. I'm a creep, this much is true, but I never play Wonderwall, not even for you. And the third rule of open mic, tune up before you go home. The fourth rule of open mic, never beg to play just one more song. There's a bad moon rising, it's a mad, mad world, and I might just sing about a brown-eyed girl. But whatever torture you put me through, I would never
That was some music by the MLN Ensemble. You're listening to the Archer on 106.6 FM, and this is the MLN, I can't say it, the MLN Ensemble in interview. Well, the first question is one, it's not specific to you guys. I have like my traditional opening question, may or may not be relevant. It's what was the last book that you read and what did you think of it?
Ooh.
Oh man, that's actually a really good question.
Jamie's far more literate than me, so I'll let you go first.
Well, actually, the last book I read was a book written by Mike Maloney called Guide to Buying Gold and Silver. And I read it, well, initially to learn more about investing in gold and silver, precious metals. And to my surprise, the book is essentially a history lesson all about money. And 80% of the book is just that, a history lesson in how money works. And I actually got more than I bargained for, because I bought it again just to read about investing in precious metals, and ended up learning about the history of money and how it works. So that was a really fascinating read. It took me quite a long time to finish, because I wanted to read more frequently, because I ended up reading other books in the meantime. Queen's Gambit was one that I read, and that's a fantastic book. I mean, we've all seen the Netflix show, but the book was fantastic as well. So that was the last book I read. So not at all musical related, but a very interesting book nonetheless.
Yeah, it's funny you say that,
I read the Queen's Gambit as well, and I really enjoyed it too. It was one of my books of the year.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah. And what were you going to say, Steph?
I was going to say, it's funny you say that, because the last book I read, I was just on holiday, was of a very similar vein. It's called Who Owns England? How We Lost Our Green and Pleasant Land and How to Take It Back, which is all about landowners and the sort of imbalance of wealth in this country, as particularly as it pertains to property ownership and owning fields, farmland, that sort of thing. So very, very, very interesting.
Wow, yeah, it's definitely something that you and I can have a chat about next we meet, because I'm sure that in terms of wealth and land ownership and assets, there's probably a lot of crossover between the two books.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So obviously I want to chat to you guys about the group. So can we get started with the name? So where does the name MLN Ensemble come from? And what does it mean to you guys?
It's a placeholder. We desperately needed something, because funnily enough, the MLN Ensemble, a jazz trio for all occasions, started life actually as a function band. And when you are a function band, you don't really need a very big and clever name. You just need a unique name for people to find you. So we racked our brains for something that was memorable, Googleable, and inoffensive. And our bassist Matt, who is not here right now, he's on a business trip. So it stands for Matt Loves Noodling. So that's MLN Ensemble. So that's what it means to us. And Matt very much definitely does love noodling, and he's not here, so he can't defend himself.
Which is funny, because most people we've played for don't actually even ask. I mean, for me, it'd be one of the first things I ask. What does it actually mean? Where does it come from? But yeah, as Steph said, I think it's a very good way of putting it. You know, it's inoffensive. It is quite memorable. And also it's very easily Googleable. You know, you're not going to get that confused with something else, usually anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So, and you mentioned Matt on bass. Who's in the group and what do they do?
Oh, the core group is myself on the keys, our dearest Jamie, who's here on the drums, and Matt, who is on the bass. And we have a variety, a revolving door, a rogues gallery even of guest soloists who come on board and do saxophone, vocals, guitar, what have you with us. So we very much see ourselves as a platform for other people to flex, as much as it is something for ourselves to express ourselves.
Cool. And how would you guys define your sound? I mean, you just sort of touched on it a bit there, but what's the official definition for what you guys do?
That's modern UK jazz. You know, I'm so proud to say that in this day and age, there is a British jazz sound, and we're very much hot on the heels of that kind of stuff. You know, Yusuf Kamal, Nubia Garcia, those are big influences of ours. Blue Lab Beats, all of those bands who sort of started life on the London scene, mixing what most people think of as jazz with stuff like jungle, drum and bass, all sorts of electronic influences. So we've got a lot of that in the mix, at least when it comes to our original music. When we're doing function work, of course, we're doing whatever they're paying us to play. You know, that could be traditional swing, but that's not what we love. You know.
Yeah.
Well, I think as Steph said, one thing that sets the band apart is that, especially going back to what Steph said a moment ago about gaining a variety of different guest musicians, because you have so many different people often coming in with whom we play. We get to play a variety of different types of jazz and subgenres of jazz. So we end up with a plethora of different sounds. And of course, us being the core group, you know, guitar, bass, keys, bass, and drums, by having all these different guests, we are able to produce a variety of different subgenres and a nice sort of different mixture of sounds, which is why we can have so many of these jazz influences. And when I met Matt and Steph several years ago, my background was in rock and metal, and I've learned a lot more about jazz since. And I think, to be fair, like a lot of people, especially people who aren't necessarily musicians, there seems to be this feeling that jazz is very often just, as Steph said a moment ago, just swing, that kind of thing. And in fact, that the genre is just so much more broader than that. And I think that's something that, for me personally, has been such a great experience to realize, oh, there's so much more to this genre than you actually realize. And people who've come to see us play, or some people who've come to the monthly jazz jam that we do, a lot of people I've spoken to have been surprised when they realize, oh, you play Robert Glasper, or you play some hip hop esque kind of grooves, but you've got a saxophonist jamming away over the top. That's fantastic. And for me, that variety of music in that world, but keeping that core sort of jazz feel, I mean, for me, that's been fantastic. And I think it's been great to bring that to people as well, because people seem to really, really love it, rather than having this expectation that it's just this niche genre of jazz. Oh, that's just swing and it's just somewhat esoteric and that's it. But it's not like that at all.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you guys, and I think part of it you have just answered in terms of the wide variety of different musical influences that that you guys touch upon. But I think there may be a perception amongst some people of jazz as like you think of, when I think of jazz anyway, my immediate thoughts are like, the Roaring Twenties and jazz bars and sort of that scene there. And I wondered, like, how do you think jazz stays relevant in today's day and age, in a world of SoundCloud rappers and TikTok musicians and stuff? How can jazz stay relevant?
Do you want to go first, Steph?
Me? Oh, well, I would dare to say jazz stays relevant by absorbing the influences from around it. So that UK jazz sound that I'm talking about, these are kids. I say kids, they're kind of like the generation I'm talking about are like maybe 5 to 7 years older than us. So how dare I call them kids? But anyway, they're the kind of people who grew up listening to pirate radio, grew up listening to jungle. And you can't help but have that come into what you do. Not that he's a British artist, but someone we very much admire is a keyboardist called Robert Glasper, and he's done a lot of work with hip hop artists. It's funny that world has kind of come full circle, where in the 80s and 90s, hip hop artists were sampling jazz records, and then. And what you find is that contemporary jazz musicians are then inviting rappers to come back on and play live with them. So there's a lot of cross-pollination there. In staying in touch with what's current, jazz is very much keeping itself alive. It's just that you wouldn't necessarily know it as jazz if you put it next to John Coltrane or Frank Sinatra. And indeed, we've run into that running our monthly jam nights in High Wycombe. Cheeky little plug, the Catch 22 jam nights, last Saturday of every month at the front room. Sorry, I had to do that.
That's all right.
We've had people come through who want to jam with us, and they want to do the old stuff, which we will do, and then they listen to the rest of the night and go, what's that? What do you call that? That's not jazz. I was like, well, yeah, it is. It's just your record collection is a little out of date, sir. So it's an interesting. Jazz is in an interesting place right now, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, look at I immediately thought, when you asked that question, I immediately thought about Ezra Collective, because they recently won the Mercury Prize, didn't they?
Absolutely.
And you just think, well, clearly it's still very much relevant. It's not exactly a dead genre. But then again,
Mhm.
people love to say that, they say rock and roll is dead, and then you still have
Yeah.
like metal albums reaching number one. So I think that there's still a lot of relevance in today's world, and I think to sort of um, almost to summarize what Steph was saying, I think the fact that it borrows and steals and takes from so many other genres and blends it into itself, that's what makes it really special and really exciting, and keeps it relevant, because it's not this, as you were saying earlier, this sort of roaring 20s pigeonhole. There's so much more to it than that. And again, speaking for myself, like I said earlier, that's something that I discovered playing this kind of music and playing with great musicians like Steph and Matt and all the guests that we get to play with, because it's not something I would ever think about. It's not my background. But when you get to play that, you realize, oh, there's so much more relevance here than you would otherwise suspect.
Lest we forget, what we think of as classic jazz was actually contemporary pop music of the day, and bored musicians would then go and improvise on what you would think of as the popular songs of the era. And that's what jazz needs to do to stay alive, and that's one of the things we do. We'll take Lizzo, Dua Lipa, whatever, and riff on it, and it becomes jazz. Jazz is a mindset, if you'll forgive the cliche.
That's actually a very good point, because we've done, especially at Catch 22 Jams, we've done a lot of covers, but we've jazzified them, and people love it, man. Like you hear a song that you recognize, you think, oh, I know this song, but it's so totally different and wrapped up, so packaged so differently. But people love that kind of stuff. It's and it's really cool to sort of almost rebrand a genre, I guess, because you're taking something people are very familiar with, but you're presenting it in what to a lot of people is a completely new and different way they've never heard before. And I find that's really good fun, because I wouldn't necessarily listen to a lot of popular chart music myself, but being able to play it in this jazzified way is not only really good fun to play, but it's also great when you see people really enjoying themselves as well.
You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with the MLN Ensemble, and here is some more of their music.
When I arrived it was hectic, Britain, way before Brexit Britain. I wasn't accepted at school, I skipped class without telling my parents, I kept it hidden. Listened to beats, perfected rhythms, and gave me a sense of direction that kept me driven. While they slept I didn't, step by step I direct my vision conflicted. Abstract, corridors, packed bags, can you fit them all in a hatchback? Are we laughing with them or we laughed at? That's back when Sony Ericsson with a speaker was the cool flex. Hoping to be immortalized in the drawings on my school desk. Manifesting dreams out of pencil cases. Don't ask me what my mental state is. Growing up I would vent on pages. Nowadays I get sent on stages. Wait, manifest dreams out of pencil cases. Don't ask me what my mental state is. Moving forward at 10 paces. Yeah, I like to reminisce. A new vision full of throwbacks. I was too Polish for the Brits, but too British for the Polacks. Huddled up in a standard flat. Doesn't matter where you've landed at, cause a friend once told me home is where you hang your hat. Observe everything, best believe Sammy is learning. Still remember the day we got on a plane with no plan of returning. Sorry mother, if I travel with you I can be a burden. Yeah, but you carry the burden, you carried it, I know. There's no barriers, I close. You taught me how to balance out them lows. We try our best, it shows. Yeah, we try our best, it shows. We try our best, it shows. Stressed but wouldn't tell him since I was 11. So shit, yeah, yes, I'm a wellin', but I embrace it, never yelling. It's in the jeans, it's in the denim. Which direction are we heading? Nicking out of school with some mates back then. The teachers caught me blemming. Internalized a lot of emotions, I was dealing with my venom. That's one from the memory box, setting me off. Some come over and send money back home to find out happiness will never be bought. I've got the same mindset that got Kennedy shot. These words can cut for these ebony logs. You either see friends or enemy squads. See, everything's relative.
That was some music by the MLN Ensemble. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and I'm here in conversation with the band themselves.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what like the guys from Postmodern Jukebox do as well, where they'll take a song and put it in a different genre. There's a guy as well I watch on YouTube and Facebook where his thing is he'll do like, what if System of a Down wrote, you know, Barbie Girl or whatever, and they'll kind of just do this completely different genre of take on something. But I wanted to say as well with you guys again talking about sort of the jazz and the hip hop coming together. I mean, with me as well, like I think of hip hop and rap, and obviously you've got freestyling. A lot of hip hop and rap is sort of improvised, as is kind of the case with jazz as well. So do you think that's maybe why the two of them go quite well together, because they can both be, you know, they can both be improvised and create something together that's sort of greater than the sum of its parts?
No, that's a very good observation. I think, I mean, for me, Steph can probably say more about this than I can, but I would say the short answer is yes, definitely, because they lend themselves so well to improvisation, and also not forgetting the sort of the groove aspect of it all. You know, there is a lot of rhythm in jazz, as there is, you know, understandably in a lot of music. But I think in jazz, given that nature of the sort of the bounce and the rhythm and the swing, you know, I think there's a lot of swing in jazz. I mean, that's a genre of jazz, right? Swing, but there's a lot of swing in hip hop grooves as well. And as a drummer, one thing, you know, you've got to be able to do is to swing. And, you know, as they say, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And there's a lot of crossover there. But the short answer to your question is yes, definitely, because there's a lot of improvisational scope. So the sort of, from my end as a drummer, that rhythmic expression, especially when it comes to swing, there's a lot of crossover there between jazz and hip hop. But yes, definitely, because there's so much room and space for improvisation. So it definitely lends itself to that for sure, I think.
I would 100% agree. I was going to touch on the rhythm thing more so than improvisation itself, simply because in both hip hop and in jazz, groove is king. And if you think about other genres where groove isn't quite so important, you know, we're not really seeing any hip hop Bob Dylan crossovers. You know, maybe I'm wrong on that. I'm sure somebody can enlighten me. But, you know, where groove isn't so important, the two things don't gel quite so well. And jazz and hip hop are very much cousins in that respect.
Yeah. Cool. So I wanted to just going back to a bit, Jamie, I think it was you who were mentioning when you guys, you know, when you first met. How did you guys first met and meet and you know, end up performing together? Was that, as you say, for a function gig, and you just sort of kind of ended up working together, or how did it all come about?
Well, that is a great question, and a story that is very, very dear to my heart. Not that Steph will ever admit it, because he's very cold-hearted, unlike me. But back in the day, I say back in the day, this was 6 years ago now. Wow. I was living in London, and I was playing with a metal band at the time. And Steph and Matt had a sort of a similar-esque metal / doom rock, if I can put it that way, Steph. Projects going on at the same time. So in essence, we sort of met by being on similar circuits, but we didn't meet properly until one evening. Steph and Matt's then drummer had to pull out of a gig last minute. And when I say last minute, I mean literally within 48 hours. And Steph contacted me, and I think he had my number, or it was on Facebook, something along those lines. And he said, "Hi, Jamie, look, we don't really know each other, but obviously, you know, you're a drummer. Our drummers just pulled out of this gig. We're on the same billing. So your band and my band, we're playing on the same night. Look, is there any chance you can step in and play the gig?" And in my head, I went, "No, there's no time to prepare. No. But my mouth just went, yeah, okay." So Steph and Matt, to their credit, said, "Great, like, let's have one run through of the songs tomorrow, the night before the show." And I went, "Oh, okay." So I sat down at my computer, went through the set list, and I remember desperately making notes. It was probably, actually, come to think of it, it was the first time I'd ever charted out an entire set list of songs. So I just sat there in front of my computer with a little notebook, basically charting out the songs. You're literally like, oh, okay, well, the intro is, you know, crashes on every one for the first 4 bars. Then we go in with a backbeat, and that's this many bars. And then the chorus is very rocky with lots of crash cymbal, and then pull back for the bridge, like really simple stuff like that. Went to rehearse with them, somehow made it through the set. And then come to the night of the gig, Played through the set. There were several times when I would have to say, Matt, how does that one start again? Oh, right. Okay, great. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and off we go. And we made it through the gig. And I mean, they say you see the past with rose-tinted glasses, but I'm pretty sure I can say that it went quite well. And what surprised me most, and probably what solidified the friendship for years thereafter, was as I was leaving the gig, having played with Steph and Matt and then my own band, Steph out of nowhere pulled out a carrier bag full of booze and said, "Oh, here's a little reward as a thank you," which I'd never expected. And from then on, we stayed in touch and in contact. And I ended up playing with them more and more and more. And 6 years later, they're the two people I've played with more than anybody else in my life at this point. So here we are today. So if I'd said no to that last minute gig, perhaps I wouldn't be sitting here talking with you right now.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah,
cool. I love
funny
that.
how that happens.
Yeah. It's weird how life works out. Cool. Okay. Just a couple more questions. I'm conscious of time as well. You touched on this before, but I'd like to know a little bit more. So can you tell us what is Catch 22 Jams? You mentioned when it is, but go ahead and you can give us a reminder. And why should people attend it, both as musicians and just as, general public attendees?
Yeah, man. Catch 22 Jams is a monthly jazz evening in High Wycombe. We are branching out. We also play in Chesham at I'm going to jumble these up. So in Wycombe we play at the Front Room, which is a wonderful coffee shop, and in Chesham we play at the Drawing Room, which is an excellent live music venue and has been for a number of years. So we are a monthly jazz night, and what we like to do is push jazz to its absolute limits in terms of how wacky and how fun it can possibly be. We have a theme every month. So the theme this month, which is by the time this has gone out, the night I'm talking about will have happened. That's going to be neo soul. So we'll be doing a lot of D'Angelo, a lot of Erykah Badu, a lot of Maxwell, those sort of artists, and jazzifying it, as we were talking about. In October, Saturday the 28th, a little nod to Halloween, we will be doing selected tracks from the Ghostbusters soundtrack, also done over as jazz. So we like to take whatever we enjoy, whatever other people enjoy, whatever's current, and turn it into jazz. So why should people come? Because it's fun and because you never know what you're going to get. Why should musicians turn up? Because you are going to get to jam on stuff that, if you go to a blues jam, you're going to play the blues. If you go to another kind of jazz jam, I'm not saying this as a criticism, I'm just stating what I've seen. You're going to play your Miles Davis, you're going to play your Coltrane, you're going to play standards out of the real book, and that's fine. That's brilliant. That's where we came from as jazz musicians. But there's more to life than that stuff, if I may say so. And if you want to riff on some Corey Wong or some Dirty Loops or some Dua Lipa, you're going to get that at Catch 22.
Yeah, no one's going to turn their nose up and say, "Oh no, we don't play that here."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or unless they call out some Oasis, then I'll turn my nose up and go, "We don't play that here."
I think, as Steph said, it is so much good fun, and all the musicians that we've played with are so much fun to play with. I mean, the overwhelming majority, at least. And I think that one of the things that surprised me was the fact that over time, as it's grown and grown and grown, people have come that I would never expect to see at a jazz jam. They just don't seem like the type, quite frankly. But then they've enjoyed themselves anyway and had a really, really good time. And Steph always likes to announce it as Wycombe's chillest jam night. And I think he's absolutely correct, because it's, I think, I'm speaking for myself, I've been to jams, and I think Matt said he's been to jams which are quite serious in their attitude. And one thing I love about Catch 22 is it is, while it's a very high quality, it's also about having fun. And I think a lot of jams, especially in London, dare I say, there seems to be a sort of those two things seem to be mutually exclusive. Whereas at Catch 22, they're not. The caliber of musician, the quality of musicianship is very high, but equally it's also very good fun, and people have a laugh. It's entertaining. It's not just about chops. It's also about enjoying the music, enjoying the laughs, and having a joke on stage, and that makes it a much more entertaining, enjoyable show, not just for the musicians, but especially for the audience, for the people there partaking, rather than it just being this musician, oh, look at what I can do, look at what I can play, right, let's be very serious, maybe even slightly awkward, and move on. It's not like that at all. And for me, that I think is the main selling point about the high quality of the musicianship, plus the fact it's so enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think, as I've been to my fair share of jams, and I'll agree with you there. I mean, I've mostly been to either blues jams or just sort of rock jams in general, and quite often there is that vibe of people, everyone's trying to one up each other and do the coolest solo or whatever. And again, it's not always the most enjoyable as a spectator. And so I think you're right as well with the front room as a venue. It's quite a chilled venue as well. So I think that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, because a lot of it, is about not just the quality of the musicianship, but like the attitude of the performers and the attitude of the venue as well.
Yeah.
Like if someone wants to get up and just go completely nuts dancing, that's great. I mean, for me as a performer, that's what I love more than anything. If I'm jamming away and people are playing really well, people start getting up and dancing. Oh man, that's what I live for. I'm not going to say no. Look at my solo, look at my chops. It's about the enjoyment.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. And so just to end on, what's next for you guys, and where can people follow you to find out more? I guess both, give a plug to the group, and also where can people follow Catch 22 Jams?
Certainly. Well, you can follow us on Instagram. That's MLN Ensemble. That is on Instagram. That is on Facebook, although I must confess we don't really use Facebook very much. Instagram is the place to find us. Catch 22, much better on the social media, thanks to our good friend Semper, who runs the event with us. That is on both Facebook and Instagram as Catch 22. Those are the numbers 22. Catch 22 Jams. That is on Instagram. That is on Facebook. You can get catch22jams.com. Also MLNensemble.com. We're paying for the domains. You might as well check out the website.
Big thank you to the MLN Ensemble for joining me. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and here is some more of the MLN Ensemble's music. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Oak Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Jazz in Silhouette, Sun Ra and his orchestra. Sun Ra was a jazz pianist, composer and band leader. He believed he was from outer space. This is the kind of thing I pick up in charity shops just to try out something different. I had heard of Sun Ra and I knew I would at least find it interesting. And it would only have cost me £1 or £2. Sun Ra made over 100 albums, and a website set up to rank his albums listed this, his third album released in 1959, in the top 20, and the best of his 1950s releases. The Sun Ra Intergalactic Orchestra were a big jazz band that dressed in sci-fi inspired robes and helmets. On this album it is in places very conventional, like Basie or Ellington, but with bebop sax solos. But in other places it veers towards Miles Davis in a moody kind of blues silent way. There's some fine jazz piano, though I have seen clips of him playing it in a much more experimental way. I have also seen the orchestra performing much more freeform pieces, either with Sun Ra or after his death. On this album there is one track that goes beyond big band jazz. It features woodwind instruments creating an avian effect, which then becomes chanting. Sun Ra is known for the chanting, famously the line, "Space is the place." Sun Ra and his orchestra, Jazz in Silhouette.
As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We're repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights or on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. It all helps. You can also reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. I'd love to hear from you, especially if you're interested in being a guest or you have MP3s to share, local arts news, etc. So I'm going to leave you with one last tune. This is the incredible Steph Willis with All In. I'll catch you next week.
Lately, I've been thinking about you daily. Caught up in the heat of the night that you caught my eye.